Hello guys, welcome to Cloud Guru channel. In today's video we're going to talk about site-to-site VPN connectivity in Azure and how we can establish it. We will do a quick demo as well that I'm going to connect. In that demo we're going to connect our home lab environment back to Azure environment. So let's start with the design first. So as you can see in our design document, on the right hand and the left hand side we have shown an Azure environment where we have Azure VPN gateway. We also have an Azure VNet which has the IP address scheme of 10.1.0.0/16, and then we have on the right hand side is the on-prem environment. In the on-prem environment, as you can see, I have in my home environment, in my home lab environment, couple of networks, and we have two subnets basically shown here: 192.168.68.xx and then 172.16.10.xx. So when you're creating a site-to-site VPN, which actually means that you are actually creating a tunnel between the two locations, you need a firewall device on the on-prem environment. On the Azure side is Azure VPN gateway you need to configure. There is also a logical construct you have to create on the Azure side, which is called local network gateway. I will show you how we can create the local network gateway and how we can deploy Azure VPN gateway as well. On the on-prem side, in a production environment, basically we expect that we have to have some sort of firewall which is facing to the internet, and it has a public IP. In home lab, because we don't have the production grid firewall, I'm going to configure a Windows server, Windows RAS server. RAS is actually a service in Windows, which is a routing service, and this routing service will allow my Windows machine to act as a router. So as you can see in the diagram, I have on this my RAS server, I have 192 interfaces configured: 192.168.68.177 and 172.16.10.2, and I'm going to configure my subnets, for example 172.16.10.xx subnet, to use 172.16.10.12 as its default gateway and a route to the Azure network. Similarly, I'm going to configure all the servers in 192.168.68.xx subnet to use 192.168.68.117, which is Windows RAS server, as a default route when they're trying to reach out to Azure network through the site-to-site VPN. In a lab environment, normally, as I said, because we don't have in a home environment, we don't have actually a firewall device. So we expect that when you're connecting to the internet, normally you have a public IP which is actually provided by your internet service provider. You also have some sort of a modem or a router which actually can be configured to pass the IPsec or VPN traffic back to the networks which are behind that router. So for example, in my case, in my home environment, I have actually a small router, and it is being assigned a public IP from my ISP, and actually this router is configured to pass through the traffic, the IPsec VPN traffic, back to the Windows RAS server, which is 192.168.68.117. So let's go into our demo, and we will see that how we're going to configure VPN gateway, locally network gateway on the Azure side, and then we will also demonstrate how we can configure our Windows RAS server, which is sitting on-prem, and then we establish a site-to-site VPN between on-prem environment and Azure environment. So as you can see that we have actually a VNet, VNet 1, and it has one subnet of 10.1.1.0, which is management subnet. So for our first step is to deploy a gateway subnet, and for doing that we just click on the gateway subnet here, and for the gateway subnet IP address range, you can say we can go for example 10.1.11.0. Actually /26 is enough IP addresses to hold Azure Virtual Network Gateway. So let's add the subnet 10.1.1.11.0/26. So we have added a gateway subnet of 10.1.11.0/26. Our next step is to deploy a virtual network gateway. So we will go with the virtual network gateway is here. So let's create the virtual network gateway. We will call it gateway 1, and there are different SKUs are available for creating a virtual network gateway. As you can see, we have generation 1, generation 2, generation 3, generation 4, generation 5, and then we also have the different availability options when we deploy a virtual network gateway. You can deploy in one multiple availability zones as well. However, we will go with a simple configuration because this is a demo, so I'll go with the generation 2 virtual network gateway, and I'm going to deploy in we will go with the let's see, it's not showing the virtual network. Okay, so let's create, I think we already have a virtual network gateway, but it's not selecting it for some reason. So it was not showing the virtual network gateway earlier, as we have seen. So what I have done is that sometimes Azure portal has some glitches. So if you face this kind of situation, you just log out and log in, just like what I did. I just logged out and logged in again, and now I can see my virtual network VNet 1 as an option. So let's deploy this virtual network gateway. We'll go with the generation 2 without any availability zone configuration, and we'll go with VNet 1. And as you can see, it's picked up the gateway subnet which we have already deployed. Then we have to get a public IP address. So we don't have a public IP address, so we have to create a new one. We can call it gateway 1 pub IP, and there is another option, which is that you, if you want to have for a production environment, it's highly recommended that you deploy the virtual network gateway in active mode. But since this is a demo, so I'm actually going to disable the active mode for now. If you want to use the BGP routing and you want to publish your BGP routes for BGP, you can always also configure your BGP. As you can see that if I enable it, then you have to define your ASN, and you also have to define BGP peer IP addresses. But for now, because I'm going to rely on the static route, so I'm disabling the BGP right now for now. And let's do the tag. We're going to create, and now we're going to create the virtual network gateway. So we are deploying virtual network gateway in VNet 1. I'm going to pause my video and I'll come back once this deployment is finished, because the deployment of the virtual network gateway will take at least 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, so our virtual network gateway deployment is complete. So let's go back to deploy now the next step, which is the deployment of the local network gateway. So when you search for local network gateway, here's a local network gateway, as you can see. So we're going to create a local network gateway. Remember that the local network gateway is a logical object construct in Azure, which actually points back to your on-prem infrastructure or the router or the routing device, which is basically existing on-prem. But we need to create it as a logical construct in Azure and need to point back to our on-prem router device which is going to participate in creating the site-to-site VPN tunnel. So let's click on this one. So as you can see, we have the resource group. We will select the resource group. We have region, and we can call it local network gateway. You have to give the IP address. So when you're putting the IP address for the local network gateway, you have to remember that in the production environment, you need to put here the public IP address of your firewall device or the routing device, which is participating in creating this IPsec tunnel. If you are connecting back to your home lab, basically you have to give the public IP address of your home environment, and this public IP is usually given to you by your network's internet service provider. To find out what is the public IP which we need to use here for our connecting our lab or our home back to Azure, you have to go to any website which can tell you what is your public IP address you're using. So I will go to a website called What Is My IP. So let's go to What Is My IP, and if you click here, it will tell you that what IP address you are going. So as you can see here, that my ISP has provided IP version 4, which is 198.91.206.26. So I'm going to select this IP address, just copy it, and I'll go back to my configuration of the local network gateway. Now the next option we need to specify is the additional network space. So it's very important that here we are actually telling Azure that behind our on-prem environment or behind our routing device, what is the additional network range or subnets exist. So for example, in my home environment, I actually have two, as you can, if you remember the design which I was showing earlier, as you can see here, there are two subnets behind my RAS server. One is 192.168.68.xx/24, and the second subnet is 172.16.10.xx. So here, if I go back to my local network gateway configuration, here I have to give the ranges here, 192.168.68.0/24, and then we have to add 172.16.10.0/24. So if you go to the advanced setting, it's asking you want to configure the BGP setting. At this stage we are not using BGP, so I will keep it default as no, and then we are going to just create it. So now we are deploying local network gateway, as you can see, and as I explained earlier, it's not actually a device in Azure, it's a logical object construct which is pointing back to our on-prem environment. So I'll wait for this deployment to finish. I'll pause the video and come back once the deployment is finished. So our deployment of the local network gateway is finished. So now we have, as you can see, we have a local network gateway, and we also have our virtual network gateway. So both of our configurations are completed. Now at this stage we will go back to our on-prem location. So on-prem we have, as you can see, I have actually connected to my my Windows machine, my RAS server, and in the RAS server I already have installed the routing and remote services, which is actually a feature from Windows 2016, and I'm actually logged in right now in the management console of routing and remote access service. So if you can see here, on this machine I have two interfaces. One is the Ethernet 0 and second one is Ethernet 2. If I go back to my general details, I can see that in Ethernet 2 we have 172.16.10.20 IP address configured, and on Ethernet 0 I have actually configured 192.168.68.117 as an IP address on this interface. And we also have to define this. So this machine is actually acting as a router basically, right? So if you can see here, if I go to the static route, I have interesting routes here. But before we do the routes, we'll go to the creation of a new demand interface. So this is actually, we are going to configure our site-to-site VPN. So let's go and name this interface as Azure site-to-site. Okay, now I'll keep the default, which is connect using virtual virtual private network VPN. And on here I will go with the IKE2 because I'm not going to use BGP here. We're going to use static routes, so I'll keep at IKE version 2 as an encryption method. Then it's asking the destination address of your Azure. Basically it's asking that you are configuring your tunnel, but you have to give me the IP address of the destination. So because we are configuring it from on-prem environment right now, so our destination would be the Azure VPN or Azure Virtual Network Gateway. So here we have to put the public IP address of our Virtual Network Gateway. So we'll go back to our Azure environment, and as you can see here we have gateway 1. So we need to find out the public IP address. Here you have public IP address, and I'll go back here and copy paste here. I'll remove all this name resolution. I'll just keep the IP address here. Here the default setting is fine because we need to route the IP packets on this interface. You don't need to put the user account because you're not tidying up with a specific user account this configuration. Now here we have to add the static route. So we have to give here the destination. So destination would be 10 dot on the Azure side 10.1.0.0, and subnet mask would be 255.0.0, and metric I'll keep it a small value. Let's say I can keep it 20, and I don't need IP version 6 support on this remote network, so that's fine. So we add this one and say next. I don't have to put any dial-out credentials for any username information, so I'm just going to finish. So as you can see here, we have created a tunnel interface which is called Azure site-to-site in February. Next step, we'll have to go back to Azure and define our site-to-site VPN connection. Before we go to the Azure portal site and configure our site-to-site VPN from the Azure's perspective, we need to do one more step on our tunnel interface. If you go to the properties, or go to the options and click persistent connection. So that means that it is not going to dial again and again. It's going to be a persistent connection, site-to-site connection between our home environment and Azure. So we'll keep it persistent. In security, we also have to define a key, which is the pre-shared key for the authentication. So for this demo, I would say I'm going to put something key. Okay, password, which is like a default for me, so I'll just keep like that and check again. Yeah, it's converted, so that's all good. Now we go back to our Azure side. On Azure side, we have to search for connections. So let's go for connection. Let's create a connection, and connection type should be site to site, IPsec. We can call it Azure site to site. Next setting, virtual network gateway is gateway 1, local network gateway is already local network gateway, and here you have to put the key which we have just set it. We keep it IK version 2. We are not enabling BGP right now, and connection mode is default. Now here basically there are 3 different options possible. If you want to have only the connection coming from the on-prem, you can go with initiator only, and you can also select responder only, but I'm keeping a default, so default is fine. And next tag, review and create. So let's say that validation is passed. So let's create this site-to-site definition on the Azure side. So as you can see here, we are going back again, troubleshooting, and everything looks okay. The only thing is that I have removed the other interface because it's causing some routing issue, and my machine was not able to reach to the internet. So I fixed that issue, and now I have actually connection back to my internet. So this is a very important thing when you're troubleshooting this VPN tunnel. So as I connect to the internet, no problem. Now I'm going back to my tunnel and try to connect. So let's go and try to, and as you can see, it's already connected. If I go back to my Azure tunnel, let's check the status there. To wait for a few minutes before it shows connected. As you can see, it is showing connected. So bottom line is that we are able to connect from our home environment, home lab environment, back to Azure. So our next step is to see that how we can connect from one of our local VMs, which is sitting on-prem, back to one of the Azure VM. So let's create a Azure VM in the management subnet, and then we try to connect it from on-prem Windows machine back to Azure VM. So I just deployed a VM, Windows 2016 server. As you can see here, it doesn't have any public IP. It's a private IP is this one. At this stage, if you go and do a remote desktop to your Windows Azure machine from the RAS server, and you put the IP here, as the tunnel is already up and running, you should be able to connect. And as you can see, you are getting the prompt, and you can connect from here right now. And yes, so I'm actually about to log in into my Azure environment. This shows that my tunnel is up and running, and I'm able to connect from my on-prem machine back to my Azure virtual machine without having any public connection. So this proves that it's able to connect. Now my other machine, which is DC1, as you can see, I have another machine here in my local environment. And if I go back to my control panel here and do an MS, so if I put the IP address here 10.1.1.4, I would not be able to connect because it does not have any route back to Azure. However, my DC1 machine is actually in the same subnet as the RAS server. So what I have to do is to add a route from my DC1 machine back to the RAS server, and once I have the route back to the connection, route back to my RAS server, I should be able to connect from even from any other machine like DC1 on my local on-prem machine, on-prem infrastructure. So basically, bottom line is that we have to add a route back to our Azure network in such a way that we are pointing our traffic from our DC1 server back to the RAS server. So to find that, let's go back and on the command line prompt and try to add a route add. So this is the syntax, as you can see. So we have to use the same thing, route add. Our destination should be 10.1.0.0 slash 10.1.0.0. network mask should be 255.255.0.0, and then we have to say, so route add destination network, and then you have to say mask here, and then you have to say gateway IP, which is our RAS server. So our RAS server IP is this one, 10.192.168.68.247. 117, sorry. So 117, in metric cost you can say 10. So let's add the route. Okay. So we have got a route of, you can see here, 10.1.0.0. It is pointing to our RAS server. So now if I connect 10.1.1.4, and as you can see, now I'm able to connect even from this machine back to Azure. So let's verify that we are able to connect. And I'm able to connect from my other machine as well, from on-prem back to my Azure environment. So this demo shows that how we can configure the site-to-site VPN and how we can use Windows RAS services on-prem to connect our home environment or our home lab environment back to Azure. Hopefully you like my video. If you like it, please subscribe to my channel, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks for watching.